Hi everyone, my name is Mikhail Rodin and this is Прошлое channel and the frontiers of historical research. I've been filming in Israel and that time I tried to understand how the pilgrimage business worked in the early Middle Ages.
Today, touristic business is a huge, rich economy involving a lot of people and branches: logistics, food supply, and housing. Incredibly, in the 5th and 6th centuries, it was almost the same. Yana Tchekhanovets, one of the archaeologists who opens for us the world of pilgrimage on the Holy Land of the Byzantine period. She's been doing excavations in Jerusalem and other archaeological sites of Israel for a long period of time. When did the pilgrimage start as a phenomenon?
Sometimes during the Byzantine period, Jerusalem and the Holy Land in general turns suddenly to a true center of the world, at least of the Christian world. In the beginning, the Church does not approve these journeys. The Church Fathers are trying to explain to the believers that they can pray at home in their own domestic churches. And to understand the mystery of the gospel, they don't have to go and see the place where the events actually took place. But this is some sort of human streams that comes from down. And sometime by the end of the 5th century, the church authorities finally understand that they cannot beat this movement, so they decide to lead it. And quite quick enough, the church takes all the issues related to the pilgrimage to its own hands and start to provide the spiritual guiding and the actual support to the pilgrims. The peak of the pilgrimage to the Holy Land and Jerusalem is sometimes during the 6th, 7th century, just right before the end, before the collapse of Byzantine Palestine and Arabic conquest. Sometime after the conquest, which took place in 638, the pilgrimage movement continues, but then slowly decays, and from this large stream of dozens of thousands of people coming to Jerusalem for every Easter turns to probably dozens. In the beginning, starting from the 5th century, we have a wonderful literature. The notes and the whole books written by pilgrims describing the Holy Land, describing their journey in great details. And we can learn that these journeys last for months, and we can reconstruct in general their routes. Of course, the main focal point of the early Christian pilgrimage was Jerusalem. When the church started to create the new holy city, Jerusalem is still not very large town. It's Aelia Capitolina, Roman city, more or less in the size of modern old city as we know it from Ottoman periods. Soon enough, the city has to expand its limits because there is simply no place within the city for all these crowds coming from all over, and we know from where. We do have a mention of Christians coming from truly all the corners of the oikumene, from Africa, Egypt, of course, Ethiopia, from the far west, Britain and Gaul, from Italy, of course, and other Latin provinces of the empire, and also from quite far east, Caucasian region. We learn about Armenians and Georgians and Caucasian Albanians coming to the Holy Land, people coming from Persia, Mesopotamia, and so on and so on. So it turns Jerusalem to a very cosmopolitic city. And we know that the prayers described by pilgrims of the past, the prayers of the Easter, the liturgy of Jerusalem, was held in Greek with translation of certain parts into Aramaic, the language of local Christian population. So you can imagine all these cosmopolitic crowds, like in Jerusalem today anyway, storming the main holy places, the Holy Sepulchre, Holy Resurrection Church, the churches of Eleona, Mount of Olives, Nativity Church in Bethlehem, and hundreds of smaller pilgrimage sites that some of them were marking the events of the Holy Scripture, first those related to the New Testament, later on also the events and figures of the Old Testament, and later on hundreds of minor sites. Some of them we know them only archaeologically, and we can only guess which events and which figures could they be marking. We are learning about the creation of the pilgrimage map of the Holy Land, and we can see how on the roads connecting two holy sites, slowly, and new churches and new shrines start to be erected, perhaps marking the events, reflecting some local, very local traditions, and we will never find their mentioning in the texts, for example. Now, the archaeology of pilgrimage is a very new developing field of the archaeology in the world, and definitely in Israel. And we, in this field, we are trying to put a finger on the material side of the pilgrimage, not on the spiritual journey, not on the emotions and wishes of the people that come to see the Holy Land as the fifth gospel, as a landscape where Jesus and the apostles walked, but try to understand how it was arranged, how it was done logistically wise. For example, we are looking for pilgrimage hostels, we are looking for the monasteries that provide certain services to pilgrims, and we do find them. And in this way, we know that Jerusalem started to expand itself and build the whole quarters meant to serve these enormous crowds coming to the Holy City during the holidays, first of all, during the Easter time. We are learning about the way how the journey was arranged between the stations of this journey, and we find sometimes the barbaric signs of pilgrims left by the holy places. The graffiti, what is counted in our days as vandalism, gives us a great information regarding who were these people, from where they came, sometimes their profession. For example, we can say regarding these inscriptions and the reality that they reflect, that a very significant amount of pilgrims were people of the church, clergy members, priests, monks, sometimes, less often, nuns, and so on. It's very rare to find someone state his profession or name of the city where he comes from, at least during the Byzantine and early Islamic period. But it's very interesting. We have this pilgrims graffiti written in about dozen of languages, really reflecting this enormous cosmopolitan character of these communities. We owe to the pilgrims also our knowledge regarding the holy sites during the Byzantine period. Thanks to the souvenirs that they were taking from the Holy Land with them back home, we have a general idea, for example, of how the tomb of Christ was looking in 6th or 7th century, how the Holy Sepulchre Church looked like, because representing the events of the Gospels, for example, the scene of the resurrection or the scene of crucifixion, they used to do it in a landscape that they saw by their own eyes. So we have quite precise knowledge about Tomb of Christ during the Byzantine period, because it appears on these numerous pilgrims' souvenirs. They used to take with them holy water and holy oil, exactly the same things that the pilgrims are buying today in the Holy City. Just the bottles change their form, but the meaning of the souvenir stay as it was in ancient times. They used to do for themselves the rings with different scenes, remembrance of the holy places. The idea was to take some part of the blessing of the holy site with them back home. And another very interesting aspect of the learning of pilgrimage and the impact that it had on the Christian world is the creation of local Jerusalems and holy sites in general back home. They were so impressed by what they saw in the Holy Land. Then when they came home to their motherlands, they start to recreate Jerusalem, models of Jerusalem, or life-size models of Jerusalem in their countries. The oldest example that we know of such recreation of the Holy City is Georgian Mtskheta, that copies the sacred landscape of the Holy City with Calvary, Golgotha, with the resurrection place, and other realities of the Holy Land. Later on, in medieval period, in Renaissance, and even in the new times, this recreation of Jerusalem became something very popular. You probably know about the New Jerusalem near Moscow, one of the latest examples of recreation of the Holy City. So we see it starting already from the 5th century on. All the Monti Sacri in Europe, especially in Southern Europe, in Italy, all the numerous Via Crucis reconstructing the events of the crossway of Jesus in Jerusalem. All this is with the idea to take some of Jerusalem back home. And it's quite amazing. It's quite amazing that we can follow the same lines of the ideas from these ancient times up to our days. Perhaps the human nature doesn't change, so ancient pilgrims wish to see exactly the same things than modern pilgrims want. They want to take with them home the blessings of the Holy Land exactly in the same shape and form as modern pilgrims are doing. So I guess some ethnoarchaeology, anthropological study of modern pilgrimage can also help and to give us a hand in understanding of ancient traditions and ancient habits related to the pilgrimage.
How is the hospitality service for pilgrims organized?
Perhaps in the beginning, people were not that many, and who accept them in their houses could be local Christians and local monasteries. But later on, when it's turned to something very commercial, and we can learn that it's something very commercial, it has to be arranged by the church. In the beginning, they use the system of stationes of the Roman infrastructure to change horses every certain number of miles. Yeah, roads were still very well organized. That if we are talking about the late 4th, 5th century, and then church takes everything to their hands. In the last years, not far away from Jerusalem, 2 such stations were excavated. located on the main roads connecting the major cities of ancient Palestine. And in both places we can see the Roman layer, Roman archaeological layer of the station, built perhaps for official journeys. And then we see that in the Byzantine period, it's turned to also road station, but already supplied with a special architectural details that we can say for sure that it was built for pilgrimage. They built chapel, for example, yeah. And there is a small monastery where people could stay, they could pray. One of the sites, even a baptismal font was discovered. So if someone suddenly feels a very strong appeal to go and get baptized, he could do it on the spot and then to continue his journey to Jerusalem. Perhaps in a very crowded years, people could stay also in the tents around the large pilgrimage sites. Of course, the Holy Land is not unique. We know about the creation of these pilgrimage centers during the Byzantine period, also in the other parts of the Christian world, especially in the East. The two major sites that serve as an example of creation of very important pilgrimage center from zero are Abu Mina in Egypt and Kalat Siman in Syria. Kalat Siman is a place where the Simeon the Stylite was standing on a pillar for 30 years, and already during his lifetime the site started to attract people that they were praying and waiting for his blessing from the top of the pillar. And after his death, this site turned into unbelievably large pilgrimage center with a church built around, with pilgrimage hospice, with all the facilities for pilgrims, a true little city actually created around the pillar in absolutely empty place, because he chose to stay in solitude, some sort of deserted place where was no town, no village, no people living in, and the sand actually attract all these crowds and caused to the creation of this site. This site was damaged very badly during the war in Syria, and we don't really know precisely what is going on there. We know that even the church itself was damaged by artillery. As for the second site in Egypt, Abu Mina is less known, and the sand that gives its birth is also less known today. It's Saint Menas or Saint Minas. During the Byzantine period, one of the most popular warrior saints, like Saint George today that everyone knows. Besides Saint George, Saint Menas was a very, very popular saint. We find his images all over the Christian world of these days, 5th, 6th, 7th century. The place where he was buried, not far away from Alexandria, also turned into the true city of pilgrims. It's even bigger than Kalat Siman, and in a certain extent it's bigger than the pilgrimage quarters of Jerusalem. And it attracts people from all over the world. Today you ask any Christian who is Saint Menas, perhaps just a priest will remember who was he. There is a fashion also on the sands, as on everything else. But once the ampulla, the small bottles with the holy water from the spring from Abu Mina, were taken by pilgrims truly to the whole world, and the archaeologists find them from Britain to the Crimean sites. Something outstanding. By the iconography, we can easily say that they're coming from Abu Mina. It's a small flat bottles like this, like a little flasks. There is a picture of the saint with two camels beside him, because his iconography is related to the camels that were taking him to his burial place. So we can compare Jerusalem to these other important pilgrimage centers of the ancient world, and we can see how it's developing.
What do we know about the differences between the people in Jerusalem in normal life and during the pilgrimage seasons? Could all these crowds live in tents?
No, of course not. They couldn't live in tents, all of them. We can compare it to the pilgrimage to Jewish Jerusalem before the year 70, when during the Jewish Passover, Jews from all over the world used to come to Jerusalem temple. It's also an example of ancient non-Christian pilgrimage. According to historians who study this period, Jerusalem during the Jewish holidays in the first century of the Christian era was gathering between 500,000 to 1,000,000 people. Hard to imagine, city was still quite small, so these people could not possibly stay within the limits of the city, and who didn't have place in local hotels could be in a tents. Perhaps the same is correct regarding Byzantine Jerusalem. It's very difficult for us to estimate the numbers. Byzantine period in Jerusalem is one of the most populated in the city. The city reached its peak of its development. It becomes bigger only in the 20th century. So regarding the number of the people living in Jerusalem during the Byzantine period, different researchers estimated between 30,000 to 100,000. There are various ways to count it. If you double it, you perhaps come to the number of pilgrims coming to the city during the holidays. We do know the infrastructure built for pilgrims. We do see certain monasteries built to the north of the old city walls of today and to the west and on Mount of Olives, and we learn about additional places built by this or other holy men or women coming to the city, and their hagiographies are telling us that she established a house for travelers and he built a hostel for Greek brothers or Georgian brothers and so on. So if you combine all this information coming from the archaeological sources and from literary texts, you learn about many hospices for pilgrims. But still, what we know today and the picture that we can draw today doesn't fit that many people. So we can guess, like during the Hajj today, some people are staying in the well-established place and some are sleeping on the earth or in the tents prepared somehow by the local authorities. It's also an economic issue. There were always budget travelers and rich travelers. Budget travelers who walk the land and those who were sitting in a carriage run by horses or donkeys or camels when it was impossible to pass with a horse. So we also learn about this different strata of the pilgrims coming here, rich people. Some are coming by sea, more expensive but shorter way, even more dangerous, and those that it took them months to walk from Italy or from Gaul to reach here, approximately 6 months journey.
How was the food supply organized for these crowds? What kind of impact did the economy of the region feel from the pilgrimage?
We actually do know about it from relatively new research done by our colleague John Seligman, who was studying the agricultural hinterland of Jerusalem and came to a very interesting conclusion regarding the agricultural crops supplied to the city during the Byzantine period. He studied all the farms around Jerusalem in a radius of some 40 kilometers and came to the idea that all the agricultural production, and the main is olive oil, wine, and bread. Yeah, those are three things that without them ancient world could not be existing. All these three main supplies were provided by the monastic farms. According to him, there were no simple private or state farms around Jerusalem, but there are many rustic monasteries. And almost in every monastery, we find wineries and oil presses. We also learn from ancient sources about the monks dealing with various agricultural works. So it seems that the church made its income on feeding, literally feeding, all these pilgrims. Of course, that was economically wise one of the best periods in the history of the Holy Land, because it had many visitors. Of course, it's boost its economy. Yeah, that was a good time.
How did this phenomenon change after the Islamic conquest?
The Islamic conquest in the beginning had no impact on the pilgrimage. Perhaps there were some years of instability during the wars between the Byzantine Empire and raising Caliphate, but as we learn, Christian pilgrimage continues. We learn it from all over. We do have literary sources talking about it. We do have churches rebuilt during the Umayyad period, just after the conquest. We do have souvenirs still spread around the world, but slowly, this pilgrimage stream started to be more and more poor and finally dried almost completely, because the connection, the easy connection by sea with the Western world was almost totally broken. And the possibilities of the great authorities outside ancient Palestine to support their people on their way to the Holy Land became more limited, and the empire itself started to shrink in a very fast and significant way. And finally, local Christians find themselves alone. And it's had a terrible impact on the Christian history of Palestine, because apparently all this great world of Christianity was built on the authority of people coming from somewhere. Local monasteries full of monks coming from Constantinople or Asia Minor or Alexandria or even more far places. All these people simply stopped to reach the Holy Land. And the ability of local Christian population to hold itself as a strong community without any spiritual support and without any financial support, and under very massive economic and ideological pressure of the Islamic authorities, started from the 8th, 9th century, start to oppress the local Christian community, and it became very small. Many Christians moved to Transjordan. Some were Islamized because it was an easier solution. Local churches and monasteries start to be depopulated. We have a very interesting document dated to 808, so-called Commemoratorium, a document prepared by local church for Charlemagne, Karl Magnus. It's a list of all the monasteries and all the churches of the Holy Land existing in 808. It's a very dramatic document. We learned that in the monasteries that once were the perils of Christian Palestine, there are 2 monks. The only two strongholds that we see are Holy Sepulchre, with few dozens, and Mar Saba Monastery, the main monastery of the desert, the really serious one. Other places, the text says, in the Kidron valleys, two monks are singing psalms in Latin, one in Armenian, one in Syriac, and so on. That means that all these large centers of the Christianity by the beginning of the 9th century are turning almost to nothing. Of course, Mar Saba Monastery exists, Santa Catarina Monastery exists, and Christian community also still exists. It exists also today. We do have local Christians even here, but it's already a very different story. It's a story of slow decay, of incredibly difficult economical conditions. No new churches are built anymore. It's very hard to hold this flame, and that's the way that it continues till the eve of the Crusades.
Was this infrastructure connected with the Crusades?
No, it has no connection with the Crusader period at all. Beside one fact, the holy sites remain the same holy sites. I mean, Holy Sepulchre remains Holy Sepulchre. Nativity Church, still it is the same place. But there is a gap. And only now in the last years, somehow we are trying to close this gap of the 9th and 10th and early 11th century. Archaeologically wise, there are very few Christian documents related to the Holy Land of this period. We know miserably little about these times. We do have Arabic and Persian historians talking about the Palestine and its cities, but it has nothing to do with Christian pilgrimage, of course. They describe how every city is built, the water supply, orchards, gardens, walls, fortifications, and so on, but they are not talking about the foreign religion. We do try to catch some details, but we are learning that there was no proper organization, that the monks were spread, the communities were very small, and when the Crusaders are coming here, they don't really appreciate local Christians and their institutions. Local Christians suffer from the Crusader conquest of Jerusalem, for example, in the same way as Muslims. They were not very kind to local Orthodox churches. But it starts, of course, their coming starts a certain revival in the Christian sphere. The churches were rebuilt, the monasteries were reopened, but this period was quite short.